Hello everyone. Today's mini lecture is on needs analysis and determining language proficiency. And as you know, needs analysis is a critical piece of curriculum development. So here's another sample situation, what to do. Creating an ideal curriculum is absolutely out of the question. The conditions in the country are far less than ideal for EFL teaching. The same conditions paralyze curriculum designers. What I have tried to accomplish is an attempt to consider all those factors involved in decision making to create a relatively well-balanced program for my students which is acceptable under the current conditions in this country. So as you may remember, the critical factors in developing a curriculum are the rationale and the goals for the curriculum, the environment, which includes the country, the culture, the organization itself, political factors, the background of the institution and history, and more factors. Today we're going to be focusing on the needs, and this is not just the learner's needs, but they play the largest part here. The teacher's needs as well, the needs of the organization must be considered. Then the other factors involved are principles of teaching and curriculum design. How to sequence the syllabus, the content of and the type of the syllabus. How to present the materials. How to monitor and assess the materials. So that was just a quick overview of all of the factors. Okay, so today's focus, as I said, in our curriculum design model by Nation and McAllister, we're focusing on the needs of the learners and the teachers and the institution, but principally on the assessment of the learners' needs. How do we know what their needs are? So, first of all, whose needs are we discussing? Well, as already mentioned, we're going to be focusing on the learner, but we must consider all stakeholders' needs, and that includes the teachers, of course, the learners, the employers, the future employers of the learners, the parents of the learners, policymakers in the community and in the country, community agencies, the states, state governments regarding policy, educational policy. This could be ministries in other countries, etc. So then, which needs and skills are we talking about? Well, first and foremost, language needs. But there are other needs to be considered, such as housing, healthcare, schools for the children, community services and agencies, in particular for refugees, workplace issues, again for adults and specifically refugees. So what you should do is have the students become active in shaping their own roles in the outcome. How can we determine these needs? Well, we use what is called triangulation. We approach this from three sides. We use as many sources as possible, including learner samples, samples of students writing, for example. We could give interviews. We could give surveys, not just to the learners, but also to teachers, to future employers, to parents, to policymakers, etc. We can use teachers' reports as input. We can use tests or other progress reports to see what needs the learners have. We can use, as I said, surveys or questionnaires, and this will feature largely in our particular needs assessment project for the coming week. I already mentioned interviews. You can use meetings, focus group meetings with the students, observations of their own learning in class, outside the class. You can have the students rate themselves, and you can, of course, research the information or the learner's needs a little bit more through literature and background research. Okay, and one more comment here. There are two examples of needs analyses in Richards on pages 68 to 71. But in the course itself, there are instruments that come from the UIELSP grant, for which you read the proposal for curriculum development. And as you know, I designed and implemented this program. So there are pre-program and post-program surveys of the learners, and so it would be good if you could look at those. They are posted in the course, and there is a request for feedback in the sharing what you learned forum. Okay, so this is basically a summary of what I just explained verbally. And I have made some adjustments to the syllabus. In other words, I have decided to divide the needs analysis project into two components. One is the survey instrument itself, which you see in number 5. I'm going to ask that to be due on September, I'm looking at my calendar here, September 29th. And this is in the course, okay? I've already made the adjustment there. So part 1 is due on September 29th. The sample instrument. The second part, the actual text for the needs analysis and all explanations are due on the 6th of October, so I have adjusted this. I hope that's all right with everyone here. Okay, regarding the learners, focusing on the learners again, what factors do we need to take into consideration? And here you've got a list of them. Age is very important. Their interests, and we're going to focus very much this week on their proficiency. So how do we determine language proficiency? That is basically the goal of this week's materials. Of course, in your survey instruments, you should also find out about their reasons for learning. You may find information on their aptitude by observing them or looking at their test scores. Information on their L1 you could glean from surveys, okay, or maybe even information that the institution already has on the learner. Their educational background is very important. We have discussed literacy factors that play a large role in L2 learning. Other background information on their culture, history, and the type of schooling they have received. Motivation is critical, so you should try to assess their motivational factors. Their attitude toward learning is important, as is their personality in terms of being a very sociable person or not so sociable. That makes a difference. Other languages that they have already learned, their current profession or future profession, their experience in the profession, potentially this is for adult learners. Their learning styles, you can assess that through surveys or observations. Their socioeconomic level, that should be on the survey. Gender, of course, you can find out that way, and any disabilities. Okay, so how do we assess the language learner's needs? Well, we must determine the language learner's proficiency level, and so that is the focus. Okay, in order to assess the learner, we need to figure out where they start and where they're planning to exit. So we need to have entry levels and exit levels. So to plan a language course, you will need to know the level of the learner at the beginning, the level that the learners are expected to reach by the end of the program, depending on how long your program is, and that is within your parameters. Typical proficiency levels in language programs and in commercial materials go from beginner or beginning, and that could be low beginning to high beginning. There is a continuum there, as well as intermediate, again on a continuum from low to high, and advanced, again on this continuum from low to high. Now, there are ways that we describe proficiency levels, and there are institutions and organizations that focus on nothing but establishing language learner proficiency. And in front of you, you have one of the most prominent ones. It is for foreign languages, but it includes English. So the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Language Proficiency Guidelines, this is in short called ACTFL. It establishes 5 major levels for language learning: novice, and that is on a continuum from low to mid to high; intermediate, again on a continuum, as well as advanced on a continuum; and then superior and distinguished. So in total there are quite a few levels here, 5 major ones, but in addition there are these continuums. I'm not sure what the plural is. Okay, so in each of 5 skills there are samples that you can listen to, and we will be looking at some of them. Okay, each level, so for example, speaking intermediate on the ACTFL guidelines has a band descriptor, and you need to look at those band descriptors to see whether those match your language learners, because they describe a particular proficiency. Then you can look at some samples, and those are links in the samples, okay, that you may click, and we will look at a couple of them. Okay, so speakers at the intermediate level, for example, and this is for speaking, okay, for the skill of speaking. They are distinguished primarily by their ability to create with the language when talking about familiar topics related to their daily life. They are able to recombine learned material in order to express personal meaning. This goes beyond, as you can see, it goes beyond the basic level where they would not be able to create language. So the items in green here, I have highlighted the pertinent descriptors for the intermediate level. Intermediate level speakers can ask simple questions and can handle a straightforward survival situation. They can produce sentence level language that ranges from discrete sentences, which are standalone sentences, to strings of sentences, typically in present time. Intermediate level speakers are understood by interlocutors who are accustomed to dealing with non-native learners of the language, not necessarily by native speakers that are not attuned to the language learners speaking. So very important here, you have what are called can-do statements in this descriptor, what these learners are able to do, what they can do. So let's look at one sample here. You may go and listen to that yourself, but as you can see, the link leads to 4 examples, and I'm just going to start playing the first one here, but you may listen to it yourself.
What do you do in the office? What's a daily, a typical day like for you? I get up at 6 o'clock. prepare my kids to be ready to go to school. And when they went to school, I go to school 4 hours to learn English every day, Monday through Friday.
Okay, so this was a quick example of an intermediate learner's an example of an intermediate language learner's speaking, and you may look at the remaining examples here. Now, these are proficiency standards. They have been normed. Okay, so it's very important that you focus on these standards because they have been normed and they are standards in the field, accepted in the field. Okay, next we're going to look at the CASA's skill level descriptors. This is in particular for adult learners. So the CASA skill level descriptors show a continuum of skills from beginning through advanced adult secondary. Okay, so this is the type of learner. They provide descriptions of adults' general job-related ability in reading, mathematics, oral communication, and writing. So again, you see right there, this is more focused on adults being able to function in secondary school and then working toward exiting the program and be employed. So this is typically refugees who are still in secondary school, but then also exit, and sometimes those are 19, 20, 21 years old, so not necessarily the typical high school age. The skill level descriptors explain in general terms what most learners can accomplish at the CASA scale score level in a specific skill area. So again, you have can-do statements. The skill level descriptors provide general information on how an adult learner's numerical scale score on a CASA's test corresponds to the job-related and life skill tasks this person generally can accomplish. So those can-do statements are not just language-related, but job-related and life skill-related. The performance level designations are provided for ESL levels. Okay, they come from the Center for Applied Linguistics. They provide general descriptions of adult ESL learners' ability in 2 areas of language proficiency, and you saw that in the first description, language, that is oral communication, and reading, writing at a range of levels. So if this is your population, you may want to look at those examples. Another example that is a standard in the field is the Common European Framework of Reference, or CEFR. This is particularly used in Europe, but the standards can be applied to any language learner and typically are also referenced in K through 12 descriptors in the United States because they are so thoroughly done. So, for example, the questions for teachers about their learners are, can I predict the domains in which my learners will operate and the situations in which they have to that they will have to deal with? What roles will they have to play? So again, this looks beyond the personal, goes into the public domain, future occupations, educational, etc. What sorts of people do they have to deal with in these situations in terms of personal, professional relations within the institution? And you may review the remainder of the questions that teachers need to ask themselves about the learners and in order to figure out the learner's needs. Now, the CFR measures several competencies, and as I said, it is very complex and very detailed, very thorough. So there are 6 competencies measured: lexical, grammatical, semantic, phonological, orthographic, and orthoepic competence. This is the most detailed instrument you will ever see, and I have linked to it. It's many, many pages, but I have condensed it and provided some guidelines for you. So there are certain levels. Basic users are designated A1 or A2. Independent users B1 or B2, and there are pluses within those levels. Proficient users are C1 and C2. So if you hear somebody saying, oh, my learner is at B2, they are describing the learner in terms of the CEFR continuum. And a B2 learner would be relatively independent, and we're going to look at some can-do statements again. So in terms of spoken interaction, this is what the language learner is expected to do: transactions, casual conversation, informal discussions, formal discussions, debates, interviews, negotiation, planning together with someone else, so again a type of negotiation, and practical goal-oriented cooperation. So what does this look like now in terms of actual descriptors? This is copied from the link that you have at the top, the Pearson-Longman Teacher's Guide to the Common European Framework. It provides a summary to the very lengthy and detailed CFR document. And you see here the descriptors, which are, again, can-do statements. So proficient learners are able to do these items in C1 and C2. Most likely you're not going to have such proficient learners, but you may have learners at B1. So let's look at those descriptors. And these are just global ones, okay? They are broken down by language area as well. So a B1 learner can understand the main points of clear standard input on familiar matters regularly encountered in work, school, or leisure. So again, even though these are used mainly in Europe and mainly in public schools, they can easily be adopted for other types of learners. The learner can deal with most situations likely to arise while traveling in an area where the language is spoken. The learner can produce simple connected text on topics which are familiar or of personal interest. So this addresses written, writing, what the language learner uses in terms of generating written text. Can describe experiences, and this would be in spoken and written form. Experience and events, dreams, hopes, and ambitions, and briefly give reasons and explanations for opinions and plans. Okay, a basic user that you may have, let's look at A1. Can understand and use familiar everyday expressions and very basic phrases aimed at the satisfaction of needs of a concrete type. Can introduce himself or herself and others, and can ask and answer questions about personal details such as where he or she lives, people he or she knows, and things he or she has. The learner can interact in a simple way, provided the other person talks slowly and clearly and is prepared to help. In other words, you have a sympathetic listener here, which most of the ESL or EFL teachers are. Okay, so these are the can-do statements for the Common European Framework. You have links to additional ones in the course. So these are not the only ones, but they are, I would say, the top 3. In the K through 12 area, you should also look at the WIDA standards, which your public school may be working with. or maybe the Common Core standards, which are currently being developed for ESL for implementation this year. I have not seen any published ESL Common Core standards, but I know that they will be published. So maybe in your school you may have already access to some of those documents. If not, I can see if I can get some. I know that my friend Inga White at Winooski High School is working on the common standards and is in on a task force that is working on them. Okay, so your assignment number 3 in week 5 is this. You need to select an appropriate proficiency standard for your population. Thoroughly review at least one of those proficiency standards and post in the Sharing What You Learned forum in the hands-on task a brief summary or analysis of the document, which is linked, highlighting the distinguishing features of the language proficiency standards you are reviewing for your particular learner. A brief critique, in other words, a comment on the advantages and shortcomings of these standards in general and maybe in particular for your learners. A rationale why these particular standards apply to your target learners best. And that concludes the mini lecture for this week.